Welcome to MMAPlay365. I'm Newsome and I'm here for a special episode of the podcast as there's no fight card, no event this weekend, so there's no fights to break down and predictions to give. And this podcast, the special episode, I'm actually going to be looking at Underdog hunting, how this is actually titled. I'll leave up to the marketing team, but I'm going to be focusing on talking about the underdogs that I've cashed this year, because I've cashed a lot of underdogs and coming off a little bit of a disappointing year last year in 2021 in regards to just taking a very slight loss. I didn't anticipate ever taking a loss over a year. I don't anticipate taking another one, but I definitely knew that from last year there was a couple of things that I had to tweak. And one of the things that I tweaked was the way that I looked at underdogs. So I used to look at underdogs as I'm picking a winner. So an underdog that the bookies have absolutely got the wrong way around, an underdog that should be a favourite and a moderate favourite at that, and picking that winner of an underdog because the bookies in the market have got it so incorrect. But the problem with that is that scenario happens very rarely. It's not very common at all for a bookie to get the odds that wrong, that the underdog should actually be the favourite. So I've just changed the way that I've looked at that, and the way that I now look at underdogs is a lot different. I look at it in regards to, is there a 2-1 underdog on the card that the fight should be very, very close, could potentially be a split decision, or a fight that is much better than the odds suggest. So that's how I'm looking at the underdogs now. There's a couple of examples that I will touch upon of that in this episode as well. But like I said, the way that I've looked at it is completely different to the way that I've looked at underdogs before. And I've started to cash loads more underdogs than I ever have before. So I've cashed 25 underdogs this year. That's all tracked and verified third party, by the way, on betmma.tips, which is a third party tracked and verified website. You submit the bets that you've got, you submit the odds, you submit your unit stake, and that's then logged into the website. I can't go into there and change anything from it. So it's completely transparent. I can't be dishonest or deceitful with what I'm telling people that I'm betting. And that's the reason that I use the website. The MMAPlay365 profile is betmma.tips/MMAPlay365. And this year, like I said, I've cashed 25 underdogs. For the year, I'm plus 41.7 units in profit, which the return of investment is at 28%, which is definitely very reflective of betting a lot of underdogs throughout the year. And the average bet, something else that I want to talk about, my average bet last year was around -110, which is around a pick'em, but my average bet now this year is plus 125. So again, that's reflective of the amount of underdogs that I'm betting every single week and every single month. So the format of what I wanted to go through here, I'm going to list all 25 of the underdogs that I've bet this year so far, and I'll give you the odds that I bet those underdogs at as well. And then what I'm going to do at the end is I'm going to pick my favourite 10 from that 25 and just expand a little bit more on top of that as well. I don't want to keep you guys here for a long time, but again, I just really wanted to do this reflection and talk about the underdogs that I've cashed and why I've cashed them, and just overall, like I said, just a positive reflection of the year so far. So the first underdog on the list, Francis Ngannou versus Ciryl Gane at plus 125 for Francis Ngannou. The next underdog on the same card as that, actually, it was Davison Figuerado versus Brandon Moreno. I bet Davison Figuerado at plus 162. Chidi and Njokuani versus Marc-Andre Barriault. I bet at plus 100 even money. Armen Petrosyan versus Gregory Rodrigues, and I love Gregory Rodrigues as a fighter, but Armen Petrosyan I bet at plus 150. Damon Jackson versus Kamuela Kirk at plus 135. Tom Aspinall versus Alexander Volkov plus 110. Marc Diakiese versus Viacheslav Borshchev, I bet Marc at plus 162. Matthias Nikolao versus David Dvorak at plus 120. Luis Saldana versus Bruno Souza at plus 120 also. Alexei Oleinik versus Jared Vanderaa plus 100 for Alexei Oleinik. Then we go to Alan Nascimento, I bet, versus Jake Hadley at plus 175. Ketlen Vieira versus Holly Holm at plus 210. Maheshate versus Steve Garcia at plus 154. Josh Emmett versus Calvin Kattar plus 200. Jeremiah Wells versus Court McGee plus 101. Matthias Gamrot versus Armen Tsarukyan at plus 275. Ricky Simone versus Jack Shaw at plus 140. Justin Jacoby versus Da Un Jung at plus 101. Curtis Blades versus Tom Aspinall at plus 120. Sergey Pavlovich versus Derek Lewis at plus 100 even money. Then the final three, The very recent ones, Jeff Neal versus Vicente Luque plus 170, Mohammed Usman versus Zach Pauger at plus 235, and then finally from last weekend's event, the rematch, the welterweight championship, Leon Edwards versus Kamaru Usman. I bet Leon Edwards at plus 300. Now that's the full list of the 25 underdogs that I bet this year. Again, they can all be found on betmma.tips/MMAPlay365. Of course, I've lost some underdog bets as well. Otherwise, that ROI would have been through the roof. But I've won more than I've lost. And that's the important part when it comes to betting underdogs. So now I'm going to be picking my favorite 10 and just expanding upon them just a little bit further. So the first one in the list, Davison Figuerado. The reason why I enjoyed cashing Davison Figuerado as a plus 162 underdog was the recency bias on the betting line. And there was a massive overreaction on the betting line as well, because obviously Davison Figuerado, at this point, this was the third fight they had. Figueiredo won it was a draw the first fight. Then Brandon Moreno finished Davison Figuerado, and there's a massive market overreaction there. And Davison Figuerado is a much better fighter. He's a world-class fighter, and at plus 162, the line was just way too wide. It showed as well because Davison Figuerado did win the fight. He looked a lot better, and with a good fight camp, with a good weight cut, I still think Figueiredo is the best flyweight in the world. And like I said, the market overreaction, the recency bias made that a joy to cash. The next one, Damon Jackson at plus 135 versus Kamuela Kirk. This is probably up there with one of my favourites overall, actually, because Damon Jackson is just an absolute beast with his grappling, and his striking's good, his aggression's good. He's a really, really good fighter. So the fact that we were getting him at plus money against a fighter that isn't anywhere close to heading towards that top 15 or being a ranked fighter, again, for me, I feel like Damon Jackson is much closer to becoming a ranked fighter than what Kamuela Kirk was. And like I said, the fact that you're getting plus money, plus 135 was insane. And the market actually agreed with this eventually. It was a line flip. Damon Jackson did end up closing the favourite. So again, we're getting closing line value, and we're getting a fighter that is an amazing fighter and a very tricky to beat at plus money, and the fight was reflective of that. Damon Jackson was dominant and ended up getting the win. So Damon Jackson plus 135 is one of my favourites in that top 10. The next one, Marc Diakiese versus Viacheslav Borshchev, plus 162. Again, a massive market overreaction. We even had people saying that the UFC are trying to cut Marc by giving him Borshchev, which was absolutely hilarious. And if that's the way you analysing fights, then you're not going to last very long in regards to the world of handicapping. But to be fair, one of the reasons why I really enjoyed cashing this underdog in Marc is from a selfish perspective. And something that people wouldn't know is the fact that I had the inside information. You know, Marc's a business partner. We run a gym together. We manage Marc as an athlete as well. I spend most of my day, well, pretty much every day with Marc. And I knew that Marc was going in there to wrestle. I knew who he was going to have in his corner. I knew how he'd prepared for the fight. And like I said, that's what people won't know in regards to the inside information, but that's why I enjoyed it, because I had that piece of information that nobody else had. It paid off. It was an easy cash, and at plus 162, I don't think we're going to be getting that anytime soon. So the next one in my top 10, Matthias Nikolao. I still think Matthias Nikolao is one of the best fighters in the division as a whole. He was before he got cut from the UFC. Remember, the UFC only cut him because they were planning on getting rid of the flyweights. They got rid of half the roster, then changed their mind. Unfortunate, but Matthias Nikolao found his way back into the UFC, and rightly so. And the fact that you were getting plus 120 against him, against David Dvorak as well. David Dvorak's a fighter that I like, but again, when it comes to a skill set perspective, Matthias Nikolao is just the more skilled fighter, the bigger ceiling, a fighter that could be challenging for a title, whereas I don't see that with David Dvorak. So the fact I'm getting plus 120, again, it was a joy to cash Matthias Nikolao as an underdog in that spot. The next one, Alan Nascimento versus Jake Hadley. Jake Hadley came into this as a super prospect from the UK. I've spoken to Jake a couple of times. I like him as a person. I do think that he's got a high ceiling, by the way, but I just think in this specific fight on his UFC debut against Alan Nascimento, who is just a phenom on the mat and has stifled and caused problems for Dagestani-born Russians like Ulanbekov, for example. That fight was close, and I do believe that Ulanbekov is a better overall fighter than Jake Hadley at this point. So the fact that Alan Nascimento was an underdog in this fight. I kind of get why he was an underdog, but plus 175, just absolutely not. So one of the reasons why I really enjoyed cashing this underdog is because of the read that I had. I had a solid read in regards to analysing the fight and knowing that this is going to be a really tricky fight for Jake Hadley. There were some concerns, of course, on the side of Alan Nascimento, but at plus 175, you know, it was a ridiculous betting line that should have been closer, and it ended up cashing with ease as well. So I really enjoyed cashing the bet just from that analytic side and the fact that I just had a really good read on the fight. And the next one that I enjoyed, and there is a couple of fights like this that are on this top 10 list as well. Ketlen Vejeda versus Holly Holm. Now, I wasn't massively sold that Ketlen Vejeda was going to win the fight. I did pick her to win the fight. I did think that her style was going to cause some issues for Holm. But if Holm went out there and 50-45 to over 5 rounds, I wouldn't have been surprised. But the thing is, Ketlen Vejeda should have been nowhere near plus 210. She should have been much closer. I think I capped her at around plus 150. So the fact that you're getting plus 210, the line's way too wide. And again, Ketlen Vejeda's got a skill set and a quality that was not reflective of that wide betting line, and that's the reason why I bet Ketlen Vejeda. And like I said, last year that wouldn't have been a bet for me because I would be looking to pick an underdog that was a solid winner. But Ketlen Vejeda, like I said, I wasn't sold on her winning completely, but I just had her much closer than plus 210. I thought that was a disrespectful betting line, and I thought that it might end up going to a close split decision, which it did, and she won. In my opinion, she did win as well, and that's not bias. If I thought she'd have lost the fight, I'd say, you know, I'm not bothered. I cashed the ticket. There's no reason for me to lie or, you know, say something that I don't agree with deep down inside. I think Ketlen Vejeda won the fight through aggression and power. And like I said, at plus 210, it was a really good cash also. The next one, Maheshate versus Steve Garcia. The reason why I enjoyed cashing this underdog is because of, again, a really good read and a really good read on a UFC debutant, which can be tricky at times. I don't really bet too many UFC debutants because it is hard to get that read from outside the UFC to inside the UFC, how they're going to handle the debut. Is there going to be a UFC debut jitters? And what's the level of competition like that they've been fighting outside the UFC? Is that going to be deceitful in regards to them coming into the UFC and looking a certain way? So I had a really good read on Maheshate. I saw him as a potential prospect, and I didn't like the matchup for Steve Garcia either. So again, from an analytic perspective and a UFC debut, the read that I had on the prospect was great, and that's why I enjoyed cashing Maheshate in that fight. The next one, very similar to the Ketlen Vejeda, Josh Emmett, a main event with two fighters that are at the top of the sport, and you're getting plus 200 on one side. That's always a side that I'm going to be looking at betting when it is a genuine bad betting line. Obviously, you can get some fighters that are at the top of the division. It is a high level fight, but one of them is rightly a big favourite. This one wasn't the case. Josh Emmett, I thought, again, I wasn't massively sold on him beating Calvin Kattar. Calvin Kattar's a phenomenal fighter, and stylistically, Calvin Kattar had some really good advantages over Josh Emmett, but I liked the power of Josh Emmett. I thought he had the finishing ability. He can crack. I know the judges love fighters that are looking to take their opponents out at all times, and that's exactly what Josh Emmett is as a fighter. And at plus 200, I was always going to take that shot, because even if he didn't knock Calvin Kattar out, if it went to a decision, I know that the judge loved the style of fighter that Josh Emmett has. And like I said, his forward pressure, his aggression and his power, looking to take his opponent's chin off and put it in row Z. The judges love that. I knew that. And the fact that we had a plus 200, a 2-1 underdog in that fight was insane. So again, I enjoyed cashing Josh Emmett from that perspective. And just like Ketlen Vejeda, again, I'm being honest, I'm not being biased, genuinely. Josh Emmett, for me, won that fight. You know, he won rounds 1, 2, and 3, if I remember correctly, then faded 4 and 5. But he was, even though he was out-volumed, he was just looking to finish the fight at all times. That's how the fights are scored, and that's why I believe that Josh Emmett was the rightful favourite in that fight. But again, I knew it could have been a close decision. I picked the 2-1 underdog, bet the 2-1 underdog, and it cashed. Now we're going to the final two. The next one, Matthias Gamrot versus Armen Tsarukyan. Now this was absolutely insane. This was the definition of a coin flip fight, in my opinion. Both fighters, massive prospects. Both fighters tricky to deal with, tricky to beat, have got great skill sets, are good everywhere, are specialists in certain disciplines within mixed martial arts as well. So the fact that Gamrot opened up at around, or at least settled at the start at around plus 200. I was interested at that point, but then it kept growing and growing. I ended up betting him at Bet365 at plus 275, which is just insane to get a near 3-1 underdog that should have been a coin flip on the betting line. So it was a no-brainer for me to bet Gamrot. And again, to be fair, this fight happened on the night of my wedding, so I still haven't watched this fight back. I did hear a lot of people say that Gamrot should have lost that fight, but the fact that there was that debate of people saying Gamrot should have lost, but it was close enough that he did end up squeezing out a win, tells me that the bet's a great one, because Gamrot was a near 3-1 favourite in a fight that was so close that there was a debate whether it should have gone to him or not. That's a great bet. Even if it had lost, it'd have still been the right side to bet. So for me, plus 275 on Matthias Gamrot in that spot against Armen Tsarukyan. From an analytic breakdown perspective, it should have been a coin flip fight. It was a close fight. Likely, by the sounds, could have gone either way. Great bet at plus 275. And finally, the last one in the top 10 from not so long ago, just a couple of weeks, we've got Muhammad Usman in the Ultimate Fighter 30 finale, the heavyweight finale against Zach Pauga. The reason why I loved cashing this is because actually, from a stylistic perspective, there was a lot of things against Muhammad Usman in this fight, but I liked Muhammad Usman's drive and his mental mindset, because he goes out there and loses pretty much every round one, which he did against Zach Pauga. But his willingness to keep coming forward and to have that mindset of, I'm not going to lose this fight, and I said this in my breakdown, is enough for me to know that Muhammad Usman's going to fight for every last cent of my money that I've put on. So at plus 235, that was way too wide for me. I expected Usman to be around plus 150, plus 140. The line was way too wide. Another reason why I love this is because every man and his dog was picking Zach Pauga to win, and I actually kind of get it. You know, like I said, from an analysis perspective, Zach Pauga had speed, he had volume, he had decent hands, but it was the fact that Usman, although he would lose round one, I knew he would lose round one. The fact that he fights for your money, he's got that knockout power. He's the legitimate heavyweight as well that's fought his career at heavyweight, not at light heavyweight. And the fact that he could end up squeaking a decision. And he also beat, in my opinion, the fighter that I thought was going to win the entire Ultimate Fighter 30 season for the heavyweight. So, like I say, plus 235 on Muhammad Usman. I really enjoyed cashing that for multiple reasons. And that's the last one on my top 10. And that is now the end of this special episode. A little bit different. I've not done this before, but it is a good reflection of the first 8 months of 2022, how I've changed my perception and how I view underdogs a little bit differently. If this episode of the podcast can inspire you to look at underdogs a little bit differently and cash more underdogs yourself, and just give you a little bit of inspiration moving forwards, then I'm happy that I've done a good job here. Thank you for tuning in and thank you for listening. I'm Newsome. We'll see you again soon.